Pasadena. It's so great to be here. You know, when I listen to everybody talking, getting together, sharing ideas, it really feels like Pasadena, what we're doing in here is innovative, because you don't see it that much out in the world. And it's great that we all do this. And I've been coming since last spring, and it's exciting to be here. So I'm happy to be here. I'm a brand story strategist, and I want you guys to remember one thing today. I want you to remember what my Grandma B used to say. This is Grandma B right here. She's been gone a long time, but she used to always say, half with the head, half with the heart. And she was talking about all of her 5 grandchildren getting dates and getting married and all the rest of it. But as I've gone through corporate America and startups and talked to people, what I realized is that there's an incredible commitment to giving the data of what we do in the world, but sometimes we leave the heart part behind. And I want to encourage everybody here to think about when they tell their story, whether or not they balance out the heart and the head. So when I come here, what I see is you guys are the dreamers, you're the creators, you're the angels, you're the ones who make things happen. And it's really important that your stories get out into the world and that you share them with other people. So this talk is about you personally, because I've had a lot of people, when I've consulted with companies, they say, well, what about for individuals? What about for me? And I said, yeah, do the work for your story. Get your story down and clear and passionate and detailed and share it with the world. I want you to think about your causes. It could be Innovate Pasadena. It could be anything that you care passionately about. It can be for your startup. Startups desperately need to be thinking about their story because they're new to the world and people need to hear it. And of course, it can be about your mature brand, because what happens in mature brands is that they forget their story. Sometimes they leave it behind as you're dealing with the minutiae of everyday life. So I want to start here by giving you a little information about me, my story. Okay, I'm 6'4", I'm 180 pounds, I'm born in LA, I'm married, I have 8-year-old boy-girl twins. It's their birthday today. By the way, I don't want to make anybody feel guilty here, but I had to dump my kids really early this morning so I could be here on time, and they're pissed. So we're gonna have to deal with that later, but you're worth it, really. Forget that story I just told you. I'm 6'4", I'm 180, blah, blah, blah. I have an MA and a BSc in International Relations, which is my strategic background. I'm a brand story strategist, worked in cycling, fashion, hospitality, wellness, technology, with professional firms and many more. I've been in a lot of different industries. And do you guys think you know me now?
No.
No, you've got some data about who I am. So let's try something a little bit different. Okay, I've got 4 stories here. First story. If only I had kissed more girls, I wouldn't have been paralyzed. Number 2, food poisoning saved my life. Number 3, a total eclipse of the stadium lights. And number 4, narrow escape from the CIA. Can somebody here please pick number 1 through number 4 for me to tell that story? Number 4. Boy, I would have lost that bet. Okay.
Which one do you want us to do for you?
No, that's not the game. That's not the game.
Number 1 is kind of...
It's too obvious.
All guys have that one, so...
No. I was really paralyzed. Not in fear. In a hospital bed, paralyzed. Okay. So I finished my master's degree in international relations. I happen to have been living in England for a long time. And I was thinking, what do I want to do with my life? I have no idea. Most of my family had moved back to the States, so I was alone in Britain. I'd spent half my life there at the time. And back then, the James Bond films were really a big deal. and so were some of the other films that were out and around. And I thought, why not become a spy, right? Let's join the CIA and do really cool things. So back then, I of course had to write a letter to the CIA and let them know that I was coming back to the States and was interested in, being a spy. So I came back and I moved in with my mommy, having been abroad for a while, and I waited, and one of the letters I got from what I sent out was, in fact, from the Central Intelligence Agency. And they said, wow, you have a really interesting background, you were an athlete, you have a master's degree in international relations, our kind of guy, come on down. So I had an appointment, and I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but I drove east on the 60 to a place I've never heard of, even though I'm a native Angeleno. And I got off the exit, and I drove to this nondescript office building. And there's no names on the suites or on their suite, but I find their suite number, and I go in, and there's one of those crazy little button pads, even back in the day. And strangely, the door just opens for me. And I was there for an interview, so they invited me back to see the station head. And we went back into his office, and we had this really nice chat. And he went through my file, and he got very excited about the fact that actually I was a pretty good candidate. The job was to be a field editor. So I would be stationed in a country, and all the spies would gather their stuff and give it to me, and I'd turn it into a report for Langley on what was going on. So I thought that was a pretty cool job. He shakes my hand, he said, one more thing, we have to know that you can learn languages. So we're sending you to UCLA, show up at this time, and we'll test you for ability to learn languages. So I felt great, and I walked out the door, and I'm about to leave, and he says, wait a minute, how long have you been back from England? And I said, about 6 months. And he said, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. I'm not allowed to talk to you until you've been back for 2 years. From England. So, this story's going too long. So I was confused, but anyway, I walked out the door. I had some realizations that maybe the CIA wasn't the best choice for me at the time. I was probably not going to go back 2 years later. But what's really interesting is apparently there's still some residual effect from the War of Independence. And I was right in the heart of it because they found that I was a dangerous person coming from Britain. We all crave meaning and connection through sharing stories, not data exchanges. Think about that in your daily life. Too often business communications are about people exchanging information, not connecting through stories. Neuroscience is on my side. Jennifer Aker, I've never met her, but clearly a very intelligent person, professor at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Our brains are wired to remember stories. Stories are up to 22 times more memorable than facts or figures alone. 22 times more memorable. Memorable is important, okay? Now, this is from a paper called Harnessing the Power of Stories at the Lean In program at Stanford. The Lean In program is related to women and storytelling and all kinds of great stuff, and you should check out their website. They're awesome. Economics is also on my side. Jerome Conlon, who's a friend, was at Nike and at Starbucks during their greatest growth periods. And I've got to know him over the years very well. He has a new book called Soulful Branding. It's about the soul of a company and whether or not people are actually taking care of that. In his book, he says that on average, 58% of the value of a Fortune 500 company is held in its intangibles, including intellectual property, goodwill, and of course the focus of our interest here, the strength and meaning of the brand. And having talked to him over many years, most recently over the last few months, I know that what he's talking about here is brand story as I think about it. Because people have got to figure this stuff out and they de-emphasize it. And that's one of the things I want to talk to you. If you are leading an organization or a company, this is something like what your brain might look like as you're thinking about all the things you need to deal with. it's chaotic. Sales, that blasts out, it's so important. Product development, what the heck are you going to come up with next? I was just talking to someone about that. Investor relations, human resources, manufacturing things you have to deal with, all these things. Over here is a box for marketing. Inside that box is a smaller box for branding. Inside that is your story. I don't think many CEOs and presidents and even CMOs that I deal with think about story as the focal point of what they do, because they're dealing with all the stuff you have to do throughout the day. All these things are competing. What I want to challenge everyone, whether it's your personal story or you're running a business or you're thinking about a startup that has to deal with all of these things, is I want you to think of brand story as an all-encompassing filter for your success. It's an opportunity to organize everything and to bring it out front, because it informs every aspect here. When you want to attract and retain great people, that's about your brand story. When you want to get great partnerships out in the world, they need to know who you are so they can deliver on the promise. This is a chance to guide your everyday decisions, and I think it's a challenge to try to put brand story out front, because so many people say, yeah, I get the value of that, but then they don't do it, because going back to the last slide, it doesn't get the exposure that some of the more important things do in your daily life, and I'm saying it is that important. So I'm challenging you guys to be merchants of mythology. Think about what you're offering. That's you. Those are the dragons that you have to slay on your journey to be successful. Because your story is your heartbeat. It should guide and inspire everything you communicate, and it shows others, it's how they experience your brand and how they share it with other people. So I want you all to think about, what dragons are you trying to slay in your life? Where are you trying to get to? What is the holy grail of what you're trying to pull off here? There's a book out of Europe that does fairy tale models and talks about, if you have a business, an organization, do a fairy tale model of your journey and what you're fighting for, which is, I think, really important. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. This one is for Apple computers, okay? The benefactor is Apple. Thank you, Apple. The goal, creative diversity. The beneficiary are people like me, probably people like a lot of you, okay? The support for that is the unique design and user-friendly software that they do. Think about what happened when the iPod first came out. What a crazy idea. How could anybody even get their heads around that? And yet, they're putting stuff out, and they have put stuff out that excites people and engages people and changes things. The hero, Steve Jobs and his team. The adversary, the devil, of course, IBM and Microsoft. Bigger picture, anonymous and efficient uniformity. Because people like me don't want that. We want to do something creative and challenging and interesting. So what makes a great story? When you're thinking about your journey, your story, what makes a great story? First of all, find the drama. What's really interesting about what you're doing? Don't just show up and be like everyone else. That makes you a commodity. You need to be a brand, and to be a brand, you need to tell your story. The 180-degree rule. I come across so many businesses, so many organizations that stand there with their factory behind them, and they blast out from their perspective their story. Even if they've done the story work, it's going out from their perspective. And they're talking, and they're talking, and they're talking, and what they really need to do is turn around and think about the person who's receiving the story. What is it like to be that person? What do they care about? What do they want to be doing? That's something that not enough people think about. Make it sticky. Malcolm Gladwell, in his book, The Tipping Point, talked about making stories sticky. Making them sticky means that they're memorable because they're well crafted. You think about story arc, character, and all the rest of it. This shot, I don't know if many of you have been to Seattle and Pike's Place Market, but there's an alley that's covered in bubble gum or chewing gum. And it keeps, the entire alley is covered in people putting chewing gum. That is thousands, well, probably hundreds of thousands or millions of pieces of chewing gum just around that window. And it is, and it's an awesome place to be unless there's a TB breakout. Then you don't want to be anywhere near that. No soapboxes. Back in the day, by the way, that's Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park in London. And for generations, people take a soapbox, they put it on the ground, they still do it, they step up on it, and they tell you what the story is. There's no interaction. They just stand up, well, kind of like I'm doing today. So I apologize. I would rather have a conversation with all of you about this stuff, but that's what brands did. And when they had their ad campaigns on TV and everybody watched a handful of channels, and when they all read the same magazines, standing on a soapbox was the best they could do, right? But that's gone now. So kick the soapbox away and engage people in a dialogue. And then I also want to remind people, one of the most important things about story is that it's a journey, not a destination. People in their good hearts and minds do this work, and then they shove it on a shelf. And it doesn't live, it's not organic. So what I try to get people to do is figure out, how do you engage everyone in your brand community, your employees, your investors, everybody, how do you engage them in your story? How do you keep them excited? What can they offer to the story to build it over time? So what are some elements of story when you're thinking about working on your own story? One is people that have come together to make this thing happen. Another is your heritage, brand personality. What are you fighting for? Which is the first question I generally ask when I do workshops. What are you guys fighting for? Why are you here? And then what makes you unique in the world, which is a little bit different. Let's talk about people. Here are some people whose personalities inform and infuse the everyday character of their brands. Now, I put Steve Jobs up here with his dear friend, obviously adversary, Gates, and the two of them when they were young. But what's interesting is when you see pictures of them together when they're young, as well as before Steve Jobs died, their personalities are so clearly representative of the positioning of their brands. And their storytelling does the same thing. And we're going to look at that again from a different angle in just a minute. Walt Disney, if you read any of the books, if you talk to any of the long-term executives there, even the people on the ground, they will say that Walt's vision on how people should be treated when they come into contact with the brand all came from him. It was his vision, his dream, brought a lot of people around to support him. But he's the one that did it. Heritage. A giant hamburger. Okay, so imagine a company that doesn't know what its own logo means. That's what happened at Giant Bicycle. Giant Bicycle is one of the largest manufacturers of bikes in the world. Their brand is very big and competitive. I worked with them off and on for many years. When you go into Giant USA, they would refer to their logo as the hamburger. Now, they were on a journey from becoming a commodity to a brand. And it was a perilous journey because everyone imagined that a bike factory in Taiwan was run with robots and people who didn't give a damn about cycling, which is wrong. So by calling this a hamburger, it supported that. I had an opportunity early in my stint with them to sit down with the founding family. There was a nephew of King, who is the founder of the company. And the nephew told me the story of what really happened. King loved cycling, and he used to ride in the beautiful countryside of Taiwan. Obviously not in the city in Taipei, central Taiwan, very beautiful. He used to ride for miles and miles, and he really believed in it. And when he started the company, they came up with a logo that's reminiscent of a yin-yang symbol. You have the earth, the sky, and the pathways in between that are formed by cycling, which gives you balance and harmony in life. This story is exactly what people needed to hear from Giant, but what they got was, it's the hamburger. The hamburger, it's on the bike, it's on the shirts, it's on everything we do. It's the hamburger. Nobody knew the story, nobody bothered to ask it. When we pushed it out into the brand community, it was very exciting, it energized people, and it made them realize that Taiwanese bike manufacturers are people too. And that was really important. Okay, who can shout out where what corporate headquarters? This is a global corporate headquarters for a brand. What global headquarters is it?
Nike.
Wow, that was tough, huh? But that's the point. Because if you're lucky enough to go to their campus, what you'll find is everybody has freakishly large calves. They have mythological statues to Michael Jordan and all their other people. They have shockingly healthy food in the canteen. Good luck getting a French fry. They have minuscule BMIs, body mass indexes, and they have better sports facilities than the USOC in Colorado Springs. All because they want a culture where they invite people in who experience it, who want to be a part of it, and propel their story based on their culture. These guys look familiar, huh? Brand personality. Do you remember this ad campaign? It wasn't that long ago. Apple versus PC ads. Hello, I'm a Mac, and I'm a PC. It does look a bit like the guys, doesn't it? It looks a little bit like Gates and Jobs. And it does for a reason. Now, I understand, and if there are PC lovers out here, I apologize. I understand this was not a flattering campaign for those guys. But by the same token, it really does sum up the personality. And when they tell their story, Apple is constantly referring to a lifestyle based on Steve Jobs, as played by whoever. The next one I want to talk about is, what are you fighting for? Method home, yes, those are naked people cleaning their apartment. Darned attractive young couple. People Against Dirty, Method home products. Do you guys see them at Target, and they're expanding into other places as well?
Yes.
Method home products are so gentle, yet effective, you can clean naked. And that was one of their original campaigns out the door. They are people against dirty, not only dirt, but also chemicals. And here's a story that Eric Ryan, one of the two founders of Method, told me. I've had the privilege of sitting with him on several occasions, and he talked to me about this one thing about 7 years ago. We both had kids at the same time. He had a toddler, I had a toddler. He said, Len, think about your bathtub. Go and wash the bathtub with this product. This could be on tape, and I'll probably get me in trouble for saying this story. And Eric said, clean it down, rinse it out, walk away. Come back later that day and run your finger along the porcelain. Anybody use that product or one like it? You might feel a little bit of powder or grit residue left behind from cleaning. He said, now imagine putting warm water into that bath. And now take your babies and put their naked bodies into that water. How do you feel about that? And he said, that's what we're fighting for. We believe that there's a better way without chemicals, and over time, there's been efficacy tests that prove that they're as effective as the chemicals. And that's what they're fighting for, and that's their whole story, as well as beautifully designed packaging, which I think is really important. Now, if any of you have the opportunity to come up here and do this, I want to give you one piece of storytelling advice. Don't ever put up a slide that's completely covered in words, okay? So, one more thing. Don't ever turn your back on the audience to read it. It's really bad. I'm reading this because it's really important. It's out of Blake Mycosky's book, Founder of Toms. Many of you may have read it. It's a great book. You know what makes Tom special, and I have a footwear specialist in the house right now, and he'll back me up on this. Toms are not really very well-made shoes. What's awesome about them is the one-for-one program. That's what makes them unique. It's not the product, it's the program. And they know that. So this is something out of his book talking about the power of story related to that. This is Blake, not me. While I was checking in at an American Airlines automated kiosk, I noticed that a woman next to me was wearing a pair of red Toms. This was really early on. Containing my excitement, I said, I really like those red shoes. What are they? It was as if I pushed a button on the kiosk. The response was that automatic. The woman's eyes widened, her face came alive, and she said boldly, "Toms, you don't understand," she said. "When I bought this pair of shoes, they actually gave a pair of shoes to a child in Argentina." The company is wonderful, and they've already given away thousands of shoes. This woman was passionate about telling the Toms story to a complete stranger. How many people had she influenced? I wondered, what happens when we have 10,000 or 100,000 people wearing Toms? If they all tell the story to only 3 or 4 others, and then these people tell the story, well, you can do the math. That's when I fully realized the power of our story, and we've been focused on it ever since. It's not the product, it's the story. So, why will your brand community love you if you do this story work? The brand itself will stand out in the crowd. Investors, they'll keep them psyched. Leadership gives them one vision, one voice. Have you guys experienced going into different departments of an organization and hearing different stories about what the heck is going on? One vision, one voice. Staff, you're going to attract and retain great people that are appropriate, like the Nike example. You want people who are of your culture, okay? And then it keeps them engaged in the fight. They know where they fit into this mythological journey that you're on. Your suppliers and partners have clear expectations because they know how they fit into this as well. And they know who you are and who you're trying to be in the world. Retailers have a sticky, compelling story to tell. How great is it to be on a retail floor and to be able to say, this is why you should buy this shoe, and to know exactly what that is. Consumers invited in and inspired to share the story. What is social media about for business? It's about getting people to share the story and having a great story that you can spin out into that community. That's the way to do it. And press, I don't know if you guys know many press people, but they have their editorial calendars and they're desperate for something to slot in. If you do great story work and you actually get it out into their hands and into their lives, they are going to be able to slot you very easily into their editorial stories. So, here's my challenge to you. I know some of you out there have killer society-changing, hyper-brilliant, blow-our-minds ideas, but don't just make it a logical choice. We also need to fall in love a little. That's what's sustainable. So remember what Grandma B said, half with the head, half with the heart, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Okay. So Chuck, did you want me to do the photo right now or after Q&A?
Oh, Q&A first.
Q&A. Excellent. All right, so we're going to open up to Q&A real quick. By the way, amazing presentation. I learned a lot about the importance of telling your story and how the soul of your company actually is sometimes equally, if not more important than what you're actually selling. So I think that's a really great take-home message for anyone that's working on a project or has a company that has a story to be told or developed before telling it, right? Okay, so again, Q&A, reserve comments and the stories for offline, and let's open up for a few minutes. John's not here. I guess that's my job today. So raise your hand if you have a question.
Hi, Larry Alvarado. What's the biggest difficulty or obstacle do you find most companies or businesses have in thinking along these lines?
Excellent. Thank you. Is this on? It's good? You can hear me? Yep. Honestly, everybody I go in and talk to about this says they do it, and they don't. And they say they do it because they want to check it off their list. And when you challenge them on it, which is pretty difficult sometimes, there's pushback because, you know, that's what we all do. We're all thinking about it. But if you ask them, what's your core story? You know, if you ask them, how have you implemented it into your HR practices? They generally don't have answers. So it's the sense that people feel they're already doing it and that it's a luxury, not like that slide I showed you where it's supposed to inform everything you're doing.
Excellent. Next question.
Thank you. Super presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.
Enjoyed it. Just to add, it's not a question so much as a comment on what you said, to add to what you said. I think one of the big problems with corporations is not many people believe in the story. And therefore, there is no buy-in. I mean, the founders might have a buy-in, you know, the guys at the top might have the buy-in, the 1%. The 99% don't have the buy-in. And that's one of the reasons why you don't see the implementation. You know, everyone says, yeah, you gotta do it. And then no one does it.
You know, that wasn't a question, but I have an answer for that. This came pretty hot. You know, Sonia and I met and talked for a while a few months ago, and one of the things that came up in our dialogue about her vision of the world through UX and all of her other smart thinking, and what I'm passionate about, is authenticity. And the problem is that too many people shove this to the side. They give it to an ad agency, and they have preconceived notions. They don't actually grab, and I appreciate you reminding me of the notion of soul and working on an organization's soul. They don't dig into the soul. They do something that's quite tinny, quite superficial, that bounces off of people and it doesn't move them. So you're right. The whole point in what I want to do for organizations, and other people like me want to do for organizations, and you can even do for yourself, is dig in deep and find out what that soul is and get it applied. And like I said, you can't do the work and then leave it on the sidelines. It's got to be integrated into what you're doing on a daily basis.
Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Chris Chalmers. And so just to clarify, it's not just coming up with a story to put out to the world. Would you agree that it's, you know, for a mature brand or a startup brand, it's not just coming up with a story to share, but it's also one to inspire the employees? I mean, is it something that you want to, you know, let's say someone is in charge of, you know, Brian, for instance, business development or his company, to sit down with all of their employees and say, look, this is our story, this is the message that we want you to send across, no matter what job you're doing for us. Is that kind of what you're saying, or is it more just
Yes.
see what we're going to share with the world?
So what's so interesting is that most people that I talk to say, wow, you do great storytelling, so let's do a really cool ad campaign. Let's do amazing social media campaign around. And I say, you know what I really love? I really love when you do an internal campaign that gets the employees really excited and rallying around the mission. That gives me as much pleasure as the external. So it's for everybody. If I had a brand community chart, and I kind of did one briefly, you know, there are the investors, the leadership, the staff, the suppliers and partners, retailers, consumers. When I work with a client and we chart this out, and we ask what each one needs or wants from the brand, then and we work through it, then we have an opportunity to really think about how the story is going to play differently for each of those constituent members. Because it's not just one story. It's like great traditional stories. When you tell them to adults, it's going to be different from 8-year-old kids, which is different from 2-year-olds. So it has to be different for each one. Oh, I've got something up there.
For smaller agencies and companies, there's the corporate brand, which we talked about, but there's also a personal brand. And so how do those fit together? Is there a cascade? Or do you just lump them together?
You know, I think it depends on the circumstance. I think it's different answer for different organizations. I find that with smaller organizations, and I've worked with a lot of startups and a lot of small businesses that are very personal, individual kind of driven, and it's important to really understand the personal story is very important, but it does also have to be adapted to how does that impact the brand organizational story. And it's dangerous. I've worked with agencies where they're very personality driven, and that's okay if that's what your positioning in the world is. So it kind of depends on where you're saying this is who we are. It goes back to the soul. Is the soul of the individual organizationally? And if that is, great. If it isn't, then you need to figure out how do we meld this into something that's greater than itself. I hope that answers.
Hi, my name is Claude Delgado, and you know, I'm having a little struggle with something you said a minute ago about having a campaign for the employees. It seems to me that this is more of a philosophy of operation. It's a culture of the organization that gets pushed out to the market. And it's everybody within the organization that believes the same thing. They're there for the same purpose. And in my experience, the way to cultivate that is to be completely honest with the staff, the employees, completely transparent. Let them know where the company is and what they're doing on their everyday task to contribute to that. Doesn't that make a little bit more sense?
Well, it doesn't make more sense is exactly what I'm saying. Because no, you bring up a fascinating point, and I'm with you 100%. The problem is sometimes people see story or mythology and they think that it's a lie. They think it's crafted, that it's fabricated because it's a Hollywood fictional story. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about exactly what you're talking about, which is, but what happens is that communication happens in the best of places. It doesn't happen in most places. And what I want to do today is encourage everyone to be a catalyst, to do that honest, true story that then radiates out. And hopefully doesn't get overly packaged when it does go out into the world, because you need to be honest, especially in this day and age. Consumers have seen it all. And this is an opportunity. So I'm actually with you 100%.
So
I just want to say I'm not responsible for who's getting picked. It's his fault. All right.
a lot of the more convincing stories out there seem to be based on testimonial or anecdote from real customers. There's always a point where you don't have any real customers yet. So I'm wondering what you suggest for that, and are hypothetical customers ever okay to talk about?
Going back to Claude's point, I really believe in honesty and truth and integrity when you go out into the world. So what I would encourage people, if you're starting out, you know what happens when you walk into a room and whatever it is that you're doing, I don't know what you do, but whatever it is that you're doing, when you go out into the world and you passionately tell that story of why you're bringing this thing, why you're doing it at all, that's kind of the passion and story to start with. And then when you start getting traction, you get to draw on more of those testimonials and those early experiences. But I think it's really important to not go out with something that's too crafted, too theoretical.
Last question here. Oh, and by the way, little side comment will be 2 words hyphenated, startup. That has value.
Okay, so what do people get wrong most often in this process? How do you avoid that? And are you ever done working on your story?
Great question.
No, you were never done working on your story. That's why I said it's a journey, not a destination. You know, stories, brand stories, let's stick with brand stories. Brand stories change over time. And especially in the world we live in right now, it's really important to be conscious of your story and how it's changed. I can't tell you how many organizations out there hold on to an antiquated and anachronistic story that isn't really relevant to who they are in the world today. And it really hurts them. So it has to be alive. You know, as far as the challenge, which I mentioned a little bit earlier about people really saying, well, we do that, and they don't. I think the other is something else that came up a minute ago with Claude as well, which is people are brought up with this mythology that when you tell your story, you have to make it really sparkly and amazing and wonderful and full of things that aren't actually true. And they overdo it because they're desperate for attention. And the truth is that if you do an awesome product, think about that Apple campaign. That was pretty relaxed. That was pretty self-confident. When you look at the really relaxed, self-confident campaigns that are of the soul of the brand, I think that works a lot better. So I think people get trapped in that desire to do the next big thing. I'm not saying that there are some iconic ad campaigns that have blown us away with their creativity and their art. But for most people in most communications, it needs to be true and of the soul of the organization and self-confident, not trying too hard.
Excellent. So we'll close Q&A. I know there's a lot of other great questions out there. If you want, stick around, take it offline. We'll be here for a little while.
Sure.
Okay, great, we appreciate that. Last thing, yeah, thanks, Chuck. We're gonna take a photograph of you. Please stand here. Photo bomb in the background if you like. And then we have a couple announcements, and that will be the conclusion. You can step down there. That's great.
Yeah. Lower.
No, however you want. However you want. I'll make it work. Yes. Excellent. And very good. Okay. Again, before you step down completely, another round of applause. That was an amazing